Hello and thank you for joining us on Newsweek, where we highlight some of the biggest stories that made the headlines recently. I am Mark Otabo. This week, President Tinubu holds bilateral talks with Xi Jinping as both leaders raise ties to comprehensive strategic partnership level. Also, federal government assures of adequate petrol supply as Nigerians lament hardship over cost and unavailability of fuel. And later on the show, for the first time in 28 years, Nigeria begins production of petrol at Dangote Refinery. All the details in a moment. Stay with us. Well, this week, President Tinubu and Xi Jinping of China announced the elevation of bilateral ties, which lasted over half a century, to comprehensive strategic partnership level. President Tinubu's visit to China preceded his participation in the 2024 summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, held from 4th to 6th September 2024. During the meeting, both leaders agreed to build a high-level Nigeria-China community with a shared future. President Bola Tinubu also noted that the strategic relationship between Nigeria and China needs to be strengthened to advance trade and economic development programs in the country. Now, joining me via Zoom for more insight on this is Ayodele Adio. He's a policy analyst, and of course, he's very much here to give us a beautiful insight into what we're talking about this evening. Ayodele, good to have you on the show this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
All right, fantastic. Now, the China-Nigeria partnership has lasted well over 50 years. How would you assess this current FOCAC and the president's visit to China, especially with various MOUs signed?
Well, I think it was an important visit to have, and it was important for the president to strengthen bilateral relationships with China, given the level of investments that Chinese firms and companies have made in Nigeria. And of course, the potential for more of those kinds of investments to happen, in Nigeria, and the fact that we've enjoyed a healthy relationship in terms of the infrastructure development that we've enjoyed from Chinese companies, at least in the last decade, talking about trains, and a few roads. So I think, the president, rightly so, placed the importance of the Chinese visit to strengthen talks and to strengthen relationship, which I believe.
Hello, Ibrahim Gaba, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Ayodele, you can go on.
Okay, because I was hearing echoes at your background.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. So, like I said, I think it was an important visit to make. And I think that it's important to further strengthen bilateral relationships with China. But I think the most important thing for me is that, you see, the Chinese are clear about their foreign policy position, and they are clear about their objectives when they are negotiating or entering into contracts or partnerships across the world. And it's tied to strategic economic growth and benefits for them as a country as a whole, and for the businesses operating within their countries and outside the country. So they are clear. I would like to also see that kind of clarity on the Nigerian side as to exactly what we seek to achieve from the strategic relationships that we're pursuing with the Chinese, and how those benefits will tie to growth and productivity for our country. That clarity is important to have, and I hope that will be pursued with the vigor that it deserves over the coming weeks. And I think in particular, I'd like to see an exchange in terms of skill. The Chinese have grown a lot of skill in manufacturing and in building stuff. I'd like to see a skill exchange program wherein we can learn from the Chinese, especially in their expertise in building and manufacturing, in technology, a strategic skill development program that would empower Nigerian people with also the skills to build and strengthen local manufacturing back home.
Okay.
Amongst other things, I think can be explored.
All right. Well, I have, of course, Ibrahim Garba as a communications consultant, also joining me from the Abuja studio. Ibrahim Garba, good to have you on the show this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now, Nigeria holds great potential as the country with the largest population in Africa and the biggest economy with a very young population that can drive economic growth. Now, this is obviously why the Chinese investors are leveraging on. And how well can this play out to benefit both countries and not just one?
Oh, well, thank you very much. To start with, it's important that we begin to look elsewhere so that we can improve in our capacity, improve our revenue base. So this visit to China is very, very strategic because Mr. President has taken it upon himself to market Nigeria. Now, if you look at the trade volume between the Chinese and the Nigeria, for instance, in 2017 alone, the Chinese export to Nigeria was around 21.4 billion. And in 2022, Chinese export to Nigeria rose to 22.04 billion US dollars. And you ask, you asked me, what is Nigeria's export to China within this same period? In 2017, what we export to China was around 1.56 billion US dollars. And in 2022, it was 1.54 billion US dollars. So there's a need for us to begin to close these gaps. And to do that, Mr. President needs to visit China and think of how we can increase this bilateral agreement in terms of capacity building, in terms of, skills acquisition, at the same time setting up companies and industries in Nigeria. So I think this time around, this visit is to be of advantage to Nigeria. And that is why Mr. President is building on this opportunity now. This is the right time to trade because, as you know, our trade is in deficit.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Ayodele Adio, I just want to put this to you very quickly. Now, President Xi Jinping, during his speech at FOCAC, rebuked Western imperialism in Africa. And he said that it has inflicted immense suffering on developing countries. Do you think a superiority battle line is being drawn here in terms of economic power?
Well, I'm not sure it's so much of a superiority battle line, as it were, is scramble for influence across Africa. And the truth is, the Chinese, particularly with their Belt and Road Initiative, have grown significant influence, across Africa, at least over the last 2 decades. They invested in key and strategic infrastructure, whether it's rail or bridges, or strategic power investments, across countries in East, West, and North Africa. And so they've grown in influence significantly at the exact same period that the influence of Western countries have waned, largely because Western countries, set up all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles to invest in the things that matter to many of these African countries. And of course, that a lot of African countries view Western institutions like IMF and World Bank, with a bit of suspicion, especially given the experience in the 1980s with structural adjustment programs, and of course, in the early 2000s with debt, what you would like to call the debt trap, inflicted by many of these, global Western institutions. So I think what the Chinese are doing is quite clear, which is to expand their global influence and, of course, to pursue their economic interest. And Africa, is an important strategic partner for them, and might I add, an important market, for them, and so, to them, they believe, in the growing middle-class population in Africa, and they believe that as discretionary income continues to increase in Africa, they will enjoy and benefit immensely, from exporting, goods into many of these African countries. And so they have clarity as to why they are doing what they're doing with African countries. And like I continue to insist, that we also, on our own part, have to be clear and strategic about these bilateral relationships and the partnerships that we enter with China, so that we also can extract tangible and measurable benefits, from these relationships in terms of trade, in terms of skill exchange, and in terms of growing our economy Those are significant opportunities that are on the table, but we need better negotiations. We also need a lot of internal restructuring, whether it's our economic model, whether it's our legal and institutional systems. Those things have to be reformed for us to maximize the benefits.
All right, Ayodele, we got you first, sir. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the